In the middle of this series called Christian, and we've been talking about the fact that you can be a Christian and believe just about anything you want to believe. You can do just about anything you want to do because the Bible doesn't tell us what Christian is. Christian is a term that the Jesus people use. Can we start over?
Sure.
I hope I can even do this today. We're right in the middle of a series called Christian, and we've been talking about the fact that you can be Christian and believe and do just about anything you want because the Bible really doesn't define what Christian is. Christian was a term originally used in the first century to describe people inside the Jesus movement by people outside of the Jesus movement. It's what they called people, outside people called people inside. It was a derogatory term. It's only used 3 times in the entire New Testament. Jesus used a different term, a very, very different term, in order to call his disciples, to call his followers. He called them disciples. And this is why every single issue, whether it's a political issue, whether it's a financial issue, a family issue, even both sides of every single war, there's countries that claim to be Christians that fight with each other. You can find Christians on both sides of every issue. Because you can define and describe Christian any way you want. But when you open up your Bible, when you open up the New Testament, and you ask the question, what does it look like to be a follower of Jesus? It's terrifyingly clear. In fact, Jesus said that if you don't get anything else, here's the one thing that should describe you. Here's the one thing that should characterize you more than anything else. Here's what he said his closest followers should be like just before he exited the earth. He said, by this one thing, they will know that you're my disciples if you love one another. It's not the gold jewelry that you wear. It's not the cross that hangs around your neck. It's not what you do on Sunday morning. It's not the bumper sticker on the back of your car. It's not what kind of family you were born into. It's not whether or not you've been baptized. He said, here's how they're going to know. Here's how they're going to know that you're my disciples if you love one another. And then in the very same conversation, the very next sentence, he says, and let me tell you how I want you to love one another. I want you to love the way that I loved. Now that's pretty much the problem, isn't it? Because we all think we know something about love, and we do. We've all experienced love to some extent. But Jesus said, people are going to know that you're my followers by the way that you love each other, and I want you to love each other the way that I have loved you. And here's the problem. When you open up Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and you look at the way Jesus loved, to some extent, in some ways, it's just a call to follow him. But it's a bit terrifying. It can seem a bit inconsistent at times. When you look at the way Jesus loved, there's a tension there. It's a tension that we all, to some extent, want to resolve. In fact, it's a tension that we're so uncomfortable with that many churches either go on one end or the other. They're one spectrum or the other. And regardless of where you went to church, it's not like you didn't believe what they were teaching. It wasn't that you thought it wasn't true what they were saying. It probably was true. It's probably just that you felt something was missing. Do you know why you felt something might be missing? It's because there probably was something missing. The reason, when you open up the New Testament and you ask the question, how did Jesus love? Here's what you discover. It was messy. At times it was inconsistent. At times you say, that was totally unfair. At the end of the day, a lot of it is just really confusing because there's a tension there. And my temptation and your temptation is to try to resolve the tension. But if you don't hear anything else today, hear this. if you try to resolve the tension that's created around the love of Jesus, you lose. You give up something very, very, very important. And yet we're tempted to do that all the time. In our church, I've been trying to lead us the best way I can, to the best of my ability, to hang on to that tension. At times, it gets messy. At times, we seem to be inconsistent. At times, it seems unfair. At times, it seems to be confusing. One place our congregation struggles with this are those horrible Sundays when I open up the Bible and we talk about what Jesus says about marriage, divorce and remarriage. It's horrible. And if you are divorced and remarried, it's a bit like a root canal without any Novocaine. Never, and I don't ever tell you when I'm going to talk about this subject because you wouldn't come. It's so condemning. And I get the very same response every single time. Pastor, that was agonizing. But I was so glad I was there. It was terrible. I felt so condemned. Yet I gained such insight into why I struggle with my marriage today like I do. Pastor, that was terrible. I felt so condemned. Is it okay if I even continue serving at the church? And the answer is yes, because there's a tension in the teaching of Jesus. Whenever we open up the Scriptures, whenever we take seriously the teachings of Jesus, there's a tension. At times, Jesus seems to be so forgiving. At other times, he seems to hold everybody accountable. Sometimes he seems to be very, very harsh. Other times, he seems to be kind. Other times, he points out sin in everybody's life. And at other times, he appears to ignore sin altogether. The other place where I see us facing a tension is anytime I announce that we're going to talk about sex or sexuality. That's when we have our high attendance Sundays. I don't get this. Next week sex and boom, the whole congregation is filled up full of people. Everybody shows up. The thing I wonder is, what do they think I'm going to say? Like we found the fifth gospel or something? Like Jesus said, therefore go and love the one you're with? Is there going to be some kind of new insight that I'm going to find somewhere in the Scriptures that changes all the rules, that makes everything that's been off limits okay? But you know what? Whenever we talk about sex, and this isn't just me, it's all my friends, even in big churches, whenever we bear down and we spend a few weeks talking about this, people come to church like crazy. And do you know what they say? They say, that was so hard, but I'm so glad I came. It dredged up things that I haven't thought about in years, and I hated it, but I'm so glad that we discussed it. It was difficult, but can I have a copy of that message for my kids in a few years for them? It's so relevant. There's a tension there. There's a giant tension any time we take seriously the teachings of Jesus. Here's the deal. Personally and individually, we're all tempted to want to resolve that tension. But if you resolve it, you give up something big, something very important. It's what drove people crazy about Jesus, but Jesus was comfortable with it. Jesus was good with it. He was able to minister through it, and we dare not walk away from it, even though it's messy. And oh my goodness, is it messy. At times, it seems inconsistent. At times, confusing. At times, people leave wondering, I wonder what they're really about. I wonder what they really believe. The Apostle John, who wrote the Gospel of John, got to be an old man. Matthew, we're pretty sure, was beheaded. Matthew was burned at the stake pretty early on. The Apostle Paul was beheaded outside the city of Rome. Peter was crucified upside down. All the followers of Jesus were scattered. They became martyrs, many of them. Some of them disappeared into antiquity. But John was a survivor. He grew to be an old man. And 40 to 45 years after the events of Jesus, it became pretty evident that Jesus wasn't going to return in John's lifetime. Jesus said, I'm going to come back. And people were thinking maybe Thursday or Friday at the latest. Some of them even quit their jobs. And Paul addressed that to the Thessalonian church. But Jesus wasn't showing up. John got to be an old man. Years and years went by, and people were saying, John, we appreciate your teaching. We appreciate all the things that you share with us about what you saw and heard Jesus teach and say. But you're getting to be an old man. Maybe you should write this stuff down for not only us, but for our children and our grandchildren, and for our children that may not be here when you're here. And so John began to write the Gospel of John. He had these memories, these stories, all this stuff he had seen. He had seen death, he had seen sorrow, he had seen bloodshed. And he sits down and he begins to write. He writes his Gospel. He begins with his account of the life of Jesus. This grand, giant picture of Jesus being the Word that God sent into the world. And that Word became flesh. He was human. He walked among us. He ate with us. In the first chapter of John, John paints a beautiful picture. I'm going to give you another illustration that kind of points to the same thing, but it's as if John was saying Jesus painted this giant painting full of people. And then Jesus stepped into his painting to interact with the people. But the people in the painting didn't recognize Jesus as the artist, so they threw him out. How powerful is that? To try to describe the conflict that John sensed among the people that Jesus came to love. And then in the opening section of that incredible piece of literature that you have in your Bible, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and then John, he gives us the terminology. He gives us the words that best capture this tension. And if you're a follower of Jesus, you're going to bump into this at some point in your life. If you're a follower of Jesus, this is what makes it messy. This is what makes it inconsistent. This is what makes it so hard and difficult. And yet you know if you go in one way or the other too much, that you'll leave something out. Something very, very important. And here are the words that he left us with. And he said in John 1:14, the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. There's this great imagery, these words that he made his dwelling among us. Jesus camped out with us. Jesus tabernacled with us. Jesus moved in with us. Jesus lived with us. He says us. He's not talking about you and I 2,000 years later. He's talking about us physically, like me and the guys. He made his dwelling with us, John's saying, the apostles. Jesus and his apostles, the guys that followed Jesus, he ate with them. He lived with them. They talked together. He's saying, I have seen something that you haven't seen. I have seen something that you had to be there to get. I saw something. I wish I could have captured it on my iPhone or my iPad somehow so that I could post it to Facebook and you could see it and experience it, but I couldn't. Verse 14, we have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father full of grace and truth. Now you know what grace is and you know what truth is. Truth, all know what grace and truth is. Grace says you're fine. Truth says you're accountable. Grace says no matter what, I love you. Truth says, yeah, but you're so broken. Grace says, you know, it's all going to just work out. Truth says, yeah, it may work out, but you're still accountable. You're accountable, and you're going to have to work on that. There's a tension there. And we have personalities that either go in one direction or the other. Everyone has that tension in their life. And we all know what we're talking about here. We had parents. We lived with Mrs. Grace, and we really liked her, Gracie. And then we had maybe Mr. Truth or Mr. Ungrace, didn't we? And he was all about the truth. Or maybe she was all about the truth. And which one did you like better? I know which one you liked better. You liked Gracie better. I like Grace better. I like it's going to work out. It's going to be okay. Everything's going to be fine. No matter what, I love you. I like that. But you know what? If you grew up in a great home, you had a good balance of both, didn't you? Because we need a good balance of both. We need both in our life. Here's what John said. So what's so remarkable about John's gospel? John said, I've spent years watching Jesus navigate through the intricacies of difficult circumstances in life, dealing with people and their stuff. And as I begin to write this gospel, as I begin to share with you my description of what it was to be with Jesus, what it was to see Jesus as he walked through this, I want to share with you that Jesus was full of grace and truth. He was full of both. Not a balance of the two, not grace or truth, not grace, but grace and truth. The full embodiment of both grace and truth. Full to the brim of grace and truth. Not one or the other, but the full embodiment of both. I want it to be one or the other. I want to push Jesus in one direction or the other. I like the verses that lean toward truth when I'm talking to people about what they should do, but when I get into trouble, I like the grace part better for myself. But John said, I watched him. I watched Jesus deal with circumstances. I watched Jesus deal with people. And the best way I can describe what Jesus was like is he was full to the brim of both grace and truth. He said this, verse 16, out of his fullness we have all received grace in place of grace already given, which literally means we all receive grace upon grace upon grace, that he literally poured out the pitcher of grace in our lives until it overflowed in us. We've all received grace upon grace upon grace upon grace. And then to bring us to a point of clarification, he says, verse 17, for the law. And we all know what the law is. The law is the 10 Commandments, plus the other 600 commandments in the Old Testament. He says, for the law was given, and this is important, through Moses. We saw the comedy movie when Moses had the 3 tablets of 5 commandments each, and he walks out, and it's a funny movie, and he walks out with a 50, and he says, oh, behold, God has given me the 15, crash, one falls. The 10 commandments, right? You remember that? God gave the law through Moses. And this law is what told us what God expected of us. Here's what you do. Here's what you do if you don't meet the expectations. The law said, thou shalt not. Thou shalt not. Thou really shalt not this or that. And then if you do, then you must go and sacrifice a sacrifice and get atonement for your sin. He said the law was given to us through Moses. And there's a huge distinction here in this verse that I think John had to pause. There's a semicolon in the English, but I think he had to stop and figure out, how do I relate this to the people? How do I describe what I saw in Jesus? For the law was given through Moses, and then notice, grace and truth came. He didn't use the word gave again, or given. He uses a different term. The law was given, but grace and truth came. The Greek word means begotten, we get born, showed up in the full package of Jesus. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. Not the balance between grace and truth. That's where we all want to live, but the full measure of grace and truth. The full embodiment of both. This is what made Jesus so messy. This is what made Jesus so confusing. In some ways, it made him so unpredictable. Everyone wants to lean in one direction or the other. And John said, it's not that way. He was all of it, truth and grace. He brought grace and truth to bear on every circumstances. He brought grace and truth to bear on every individual, on every situation at the same time. And we just when we thought we had it figured out, that he was one or the other, he would put them all together and mix it up again. And if you read the Gospels through that lens, you'll start to see it on a regular basis. One day he shows up, and if you've been in Sunday school more than 10 minutes, you've heard this story, the story of the Samaritan woman. He comes to the town of Sychar and meets this woman by the well as apostles, as disciples go in to buy food in town, and she and he are the only one at the well. Well, she's a Samaritan woman, he's a Jew, and Jews and Samaritans, they didn't like each other, they didn't get along too well, and they didn't talk to each other. They, in fact, hated each other for the most part. In addition, in that culture, first century culture, men didn't talk to women in that way, especially Jews and Samaritan men and women. And so Jesus starts a conversation up with her, and that's the grace part of Jesus right there. And she's shocked. Why is he talking to me? You're a Jew and I'm a Samaritan. Well, what's up with this? And he says, I would like a drink of water. Would you use your bucket there to get me a cup of water? She's so amazed that he's even talking to her. What's up with this? And just when things are going well, he says, would you go back into Sychar and get your husband and bring him out to talk to me? And she says, I have no husband. And he says, I know. Then Jesus reaches down into the most painful, shameful part of her life and says, you've had 5 husbands, and the man you're living with now isn't your husband. And even the Samaritans know you just don't do that. Listen, lady, your spiritual gift isn't men. Your spiritual gift isn't marriage. You've done a horrible job managing relationships with guys. Jesus, time out. Haven't you been to seminary? Don't you know you're not supposed to talk about the shameful, painful parts of life? What is up with this? I thought this was grace and truth. Where's the grace here, Jesus? Then Jesus reveals something that we don't find in any of the other Gospels. We don't find him revealing this to anyone else. He looks into her eyes, all alone by the well, and he says, guess who I am? I haven't told anybody else this yet, but I've chosen you, a Samaritan woman, to share this with. You are speaking with the Messiah. And then he said to her, I can give you living water that will quench your thirst, that no man can ever give you. Then she leaves her jar, she goes into town, and she tells all the people that she's probably lost all credibility with that she's found the Messiah. Come and see. You've heard me talk about Jesus' interaction with Matthew the tax collector. Everybody hated Matthew. Everybody in the first century hated tax collectors altogether. Some of you don't like them much now, but in the first century you really hated them. They worked for the Romans. They were working and collecting money, taxes, for the people that were doing all the persecution against the Jews. They were traitors. They were Jewish traitors. In the New Testament they had categories. They had tax gatherers and sinners. Tax gatherers were so bad that they couldn't even be in the category with sinners. They didn't want to shame the sinners that much. So tax gatherers and sinners, they had their own category. They were so bad. Jesus says to Matthew, while he's collecting taxes, by the way, I want you to join my group and follow me. And the disciples were probably thinking, Jesus, wait 1 second. If you have a tax collector in your group, don't you think that people are going to think you approve of tax collecting? To which Jesus would have said, you know guys, it's going to get a whole lot worse than that. We're going to go to Matthew's house tonight. He's going to invite all of his tax collector friends and all the sinners he knows. And he's got just tons of friends on Facebook, and they're all going to come. None of them know anything about the Scriptures. They're all tax collectors. They're all sinners. And if you think your reputation's in jeopardy now, just wait until about 6 o'clock tonight, when the party really gets cranked up. People see you with all of these dreadful people of humanity. You're going to have no reputation in this community because everybody's going to see you mixing it up with tax collectors and sinners. Jesus, doesn't this concern you that they're going to be thinking that you approve of all the stuff that these people do? Jesus would have said, what do you think I'm here for? The Son of Man did not come to seek and to save. He came to seek and to save that which was lost. I'm not here to guard my reputation. We're confused, right? So confused. If you grew up in Sunday school, you probably heard that Jesus was crucified. And He was crucified between two other men, right in the middle of two other guys. And you were probably told they were thieves, but they weren't just thieves. Rome didn't crucify just thieves. Rome had a lot of other ways to handle criminals than crucifixion. For instance, they had to row boats back then, army boats, navy boats, and they would put slaves down in the bottom of these boats, criminal slaves, and they would be forced, tied or handcuffed to the oars, and then beaten to go faster, and they would row until they either died, and then they would push them out of the way or throw them in the water and just keep going. Or they would put them in mines and make them do hard labor until their backs broke or their backs completely gave out. They would push them in the hole and then keep going. Or they would just make them slaves and sell them and put them in slave labor for the rest of their lives. That's what they did with just thieves. These people weren't trusted enough. They were so bad. They were such criminals. They weren't just thieves that they couldn't be trusted to be a slave. They couldn't be trusted to be on a boat with other people. They couldn't be trusted to do mines and do hard labor. They had to be put to death. They were the worst of the worst. He was crucified between two of them, and one of them says, we're getting what we deserve. When you think Jesus might say, you know, you're being a little hard on yourself. Don't you think? I mean, where's your self-esteem? Where's your self-worth? Don't be so hard on yourself. It's not so bad. But Jesus didn't say that. He didn't say what a good heart the man had. He basically said, no argument there. You are getting what you deserve. But you know what? When you breathe your last, you're going to be with me in paradise. You say, what, Jesus? Today you're going to be with me in paradise? What is up with that? Don't you remember a few chapters ago, Jesus, when you met the rich young ruler? The rich young ruler came out and said, Master, he treated you with such respect. Master, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And you said to him, sell everything you have, give it all to the poor, and then come and follow me. This guy gets in with 1 minute left on the clock. This other guy has to sell everything and give away everything and then come follow you. That's like totally unfair. It's so confusing. I don't understand it. We gave up everything. This guy with 1 minute left, he can't even rededicate his life. What if he rededicates his life? What's that going to be for like the next 20 minutes or something? He's stuck on a cross. He can't even be tempted or deal with any of that. He can't even go anywhere. This is completely meaningless, this last minute plea for mercy. And you say, Jesus, today you'll be with me in paradise. Don't you see the tension in these stories? I'm telling you, if you try to resolve that tension, you're going to lose something. You're going to lose something really, really big. Maybe the most famous story of them all is the story in the Gospel of John about the woman caught in the act of adultery. Such a strange story because they bring her to Jesus and they say, Jesus, according to the law, this woman must be put to death. This woman must be stoned to death. Jesus could have said, well, according to Roman law, you're not allowed to put anybody to death, so get away from me and stop trying to trick me. You can't do this anyway. But Jesus didn't say that. Jesus says, okay, let's play the law of Moses game. Let's deal with the law of Moses. Let's go down that road. Let's stone her. But I want the person that's without sin to cast the first stone. I want the man that's never had any sexual immorality. I want you to cast, and try not to hit me with the stones, by the way, but I want you to throw the first stone. The man who's never, ever, ever looked at someone else, woman, man, whatever, with lust, you throw the first stone. One by one, her accusers began to just slip away. They had nothing to say. They were speechless. They couldn't carry out their plan. When the law of Moses and the law of retribution began to break down, nobody was there left to accuse. Jesus makes everybody so uncomfortable. And he looks at this woman and he says, "Woman, where are your accusers? They're gone, my Lord. Then neither do I condemn you. Now go and leave your life of sin." Wait, Jesus, hold on 1 second. It's like I don't condemn you, or is it you're such a sinner? Yes, it's both. Wait a minute, I don't understand. I don't condemn you, now leave your life of sin? That's right, it's both. Did you have to bring up the sin part? Yes, I did. Well, how can she not be condemned if she's a sinner? Sin condemns us already. Because that's how I love. I am the embodiment of grace and truth. The full embodiment of both. I could go on and on with stories just like that in the Bible. Now again, as a church, we try to get this right, but we don't always get this right. We find ourselves in these difficult, very difficult situations sometimes, and we say, God, we don't want to be just the truth church. It would be so easy. I'm prone to that myself. I was brought up in the truth church. And I'm really, really good at it. I'm a good talker. I can make you feel really, really bad. Or I can inspire you greatly. I'm good at that. I can get the Bible out and I can pound you over the head and I can make you feel so guilty. Most of you would leave this place crying about how bad you are. When I'm teaching, when it's principle, when it's exhortation, I'm telling people what they ought to do. I like the truth part. But when I'm in trouble, when I've messed up, guess which part I like better? The grace part. We're so conflicted. We're trying to figure this out and it's messy. And if you want to know what Jesus meant by what Jesus said, then you have to look at what Jesus did. If you want to know what Jesus meant when Jesus said to love one another, then you have to watch how Jesus loved. Do you know how Jesus loved? Jesus called sin, sin. Then he paid for it. Having paid for it, he declared, I don't condemn you anymore. Grace. Then he says to all of us, now that I've called sin, sin, now that I've paid for it, now that I don't condemn you for it anymore, now I want all of you to leave your life of sin. The truth part. And if you don't, I love you. And if you can't, I love you. And if the woundedness and the shrapnel of your own sins has left you in a place where you're not even sure you're able to walk away from the infinite complexities of the sin around you, I love you. And if someone has sinned against you and sent your life into a downward spiral of self-destructive behavior that you're not sure you'll ever recover from, I love you. The truth is, you're a sinner. But the grace is, I don't condemn you. No one will ever love you more than I do. And I cannot love you anymore either. I've given you it all. There's a tension, right? There's a tension that if you try to resolve, you'll give something important up. Do you know why we can't let go of the truth? The reason we have to keep saying what's true is because sin has a gotcha. Sin has a gotcha, and God doesn't want it to get you. So every once in a while, in fact, not just every once in a while, but constantly, we talk about what Jesus is saying to us. Here's what's true. Here's what's true. Here's how you have to live. Here's how you have to treat people. Here's what you have to do with your morality. Here's what you have to do with your ethics. Here's why you have to be honest. Here's why you can't cheat. Here's why you can't steal. Here's why you need to confess your sins. Here's why you need to be accountable to somebody. Because sin has a gotcha, and God doesn't want it to get you. The reason you can't let go of grace is because, to some extent, sin has already got us. Sin has already got you. And grace is your only way back. Grace is your only way home. Grace is the only way you will ever know that you've been connected or reconnected with your Father in heaven. You need truth, and you need grace. If Jesus is the embodiment of grace and truth, and if the church is His body, we are His body. We, you and I, are His hands. We are His feet. We are the best expression of Jesus that some people will ever know or ever see. Then we have to be comfortable with this mess. We have to be comfortable with the unfairness, the inconsistency, all the stuff that goes along with managing and hanging on to the tension around grace and truth. After a bunch of years of doing this, after a bunch of years of trying to get this right, after a bunch of conversations where I've offended people or hurt people's feelings, and then I see them cycle back or circle back around and get re-involved and re-established and reconnected, here's what I'm convinced of. The church is at its best when it embraces grace and truth and refuses to let go of either one. If you want to know what Jesus meant when Jesus said to love one another, there it is. It's messy. It's difficult. At times we just don't know what to do with it. But we dare not let go of either. Because there's a time in each of our lives, and there will be a time in each of our lives when we desperately, individually, need massive doses of grace and massive doses of truth. And the church is the dispenser of both. So let's decide today to be a church that's all about the grace of God. And let's decide today to be a church that's all about the truth of God. Let's continue to pray that God will allow us to manage this tension for His glory, so that people from every walk of life will know that God says, yes, you've sinned. Yes, I've paid for it. I no longer condemn you. I love you. And if you don't get that reading the words on the page in the Bible, then maybe, just maybe, when you come to be a part of my body, the church, you'll sense grace and truth in such a redemptive way that it'll change your life forever. But there will always be a tension. Let's be that unique group of people that refuses to let go of either side. So let me pray for you. Father, we love you. We praise you. God, we thank you for your faithfulness in your word. And Lord, we really do want to be a church that's full of grace and full of truth. And God, I pray for every single person hearing this, whether live in person or whether on the internet or Facebook or wherever, God, that Lord, you would help us not try to be one or the other, not try to be a balance between the two, but love the way that Jesus loved. And Lord, I know it's messy sometimes. I know sometimes it's inconsistent. Sometimes it's difficult. Sometimes it's hard. But I pray, Lord, in the name of Jesus, that you would pour your Spirit out in everyone that hears this message. Bless them, God. Encourage them, strengthen them, fill them with your Spirit and your presence, and help them walk in your grace and in your truth. In Jesus' name, amen. God bless you.